Welcome back to the Dershow. Some breaking news. The appellate court in Georgia has now ruled, apparently, the opinion hasn't come down yet. I haven't read it. I just read the report about it, that the trial against Donald Trump, the kind of conspiracy, June 6th election, January 6th election, can't go forward until the court decides whether or not, as a matter of law, Fani Willis has been disqualified. I remember that the trial court said, no, if her boyfriend gets off the case, she can stay on the case. But the appellate court has now stayed that ruling and said that until a panel of judges rules definitively as to whether or not the district attorney, Fani Willis, can proceed, there can be no trial. Now, Fani Willis has a way out. She can voluntarily recuse herself. The court doesn't, as far as I know, mention that, but that's obvious. If she says, all right, I don't want the trial to be delayed, I'm getting out, I'll turn it over to my assistant, but that might not be enough because the whole office might be recused. So she might have to recuse the whole office. And if she does that and sends the case over to a different county, then probably the case could go forward, but they'd have to do an independent investigation. And I think it's over. And for purposes of this being a case that could be tried to verdict before the November election. The same thing is probably true of the other two cases, although we can't be absolutely sure, which means that the only standing case will be the weakest case, the case that is so clearly unconstitutional and so clearly wrong, although CNN and the Times think, it's the greatest case in the world. That's the only case that will go forward. And there are some polls that show that there are Americans, independents, and even some Republicans who will not vote for a convicted felon. But remember that that felony may be reversed on appeal. And the worst possible result will be, as I mentioned before, if Trump loses in a close election and then wins his appeal. And then he argues, oh my God, they stole the election away from me by creating this fake conviction, which was reversed on appeal, that had an impact on the election. So I would hope that maybe the appellate courts would come in sooner and preclude that possibility from occurring. So we'll see. So that's the breaking news on Donald Trump. Some other breaking news: about a half an hour before this podcast, I got a call from the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. I speak to him several times a week, and I give him advice. Sometimes he takes it, sometimes he doesn't. I can't disclose, obviously, the advice I give him. We discuss everything. I've known him since he was a young man back in 1970. I was a young man in 1970. I was 32. He was probably about 25 or something like that. And so we've been close friends for many, many years, periods of time when we were not. And I'm not I will not disclose who I would vote for if I were an Israeli. I'm not an Israeli, and I vote American. I don't vote Israeli. But we had a good talk. And the one thing he told me that I do feel free to disclose is that the operation in Rafah is going very well. The Israelis have managed to clear almost 1 million people out of Rafah. The United States said they couldn't do it, and they did it. So the vast, vast majority of civilians have been cleared from Rafah. Now, there was one terrible accident, a mistake. The Israelis were targeting 2 Hamas leaders. They used tiny little micro bombs designed to just get people, one person at a time. They got the 2 leaders, but then shrapnel, apparently from the small rockets, hit what may have been a Hamas arms depot with explosives that was hidden among civilians. And that depot then caused raging fire and killed some people. We don't know how many. You can't trust anything that the Hamas health authorities have nothing to do with health. The Gaza health authorities, they're Hamas propaganda organization. So we don't know how many have been killed, but the evidence seems to suggest that in the whole Rafah operation, we're talking about the possibility that dozens, not hundreds, dozens of civilians have been killed, and hundreds of terrorists have been killed. And that is a better ratio than any country has ever achieved in the history of modern warfare, ever achieved. And especially when you consider the fact that Hamas, a terrorist organization, deliberately hides its terrorists and its weapons among civilians in order to induce civilian casualties. Notwithstanding that, Israel has done what no other country did. Can you imagine when the United States and Russia went into the way? Nobody's ever done that. We'll send you food. We'll send you medicine. We'll help you. No, the only country that does that is Israel, and yet it's the only country that's condemned for doing it. So we'll talk more about my conversations with the Prime Minister of Israel and the situation in Israel. But I want to turn now to the subject matter of today. And that is the New York Times had a story, and some other people who are Trump supporters essentially confirmed that story, saying that there are certainly those within the Trump camp that would like to take revenge against what they perceive, correctly, in my view, as a get Trump attitude on the part of many Democrats. Some think it was ordered from the very top by Biden or by the White House. I haven't seen evidence of that, but there's no question that elected Democratic officials and appointed Democratic officials have been going after Trump and going after people who supported Trump, including me. As you know, our judge tried to sanction me for writing one paragraph in a lawsuit. That case is on appeal, challenging the use of voting machines that refuse to disclose the algorithms and how the voting machines operate. But they're going after everybody. States are now going after electors. I'm representing one of the electors in Arizona. And so there's no doubt that there's been a Get Trump and Get Trump associates. Project 65 admits it. They are a group of radical left-wing McCarthyite lawyers who have said that their goal is to make life impossible for any lawyer who defends Donald Trump or anybody on Trump's side. These McCarthyites are saying they want to make it impossible for lawyers to continue to practice law if they represent anybody associated with Trump. Just substitute the word communist for Trump, and you're back to 1950s McCarthyism, pure and simple McCarthyism. And yet these people hold themselves out as paragons of principle and of neutral, civil libertarians. They couldn't be further from that. They are people who would put others in jail and disbar them for the crime of defending Donald Trump or anybody on Donald Trump's side. And I predicted right from the beginning, literally from the very beginning, that if this happened, it would start a war of weaponization of the justice system, and both sides would participate in the war. We would see weaponization on both sides. And it happened in the past when the Democrats impeached Mayorkas. You can say whatever you want about Mayorkas. The one thing you can't say about him is that he committed an impeachable offense. How do I know that? Because all the Republicans applauded me when I got on the floor of the Senate and said Trump didn't commit an impeachable offense. When he was impeached, impeachable offenses are limited. Treason and bribery are the only two. And then there's a general provision, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Other high crimes and misdemeanors means other criminal type conduct akin to treason and bribery. Mayorkas didn't do that, and Trump didn't do that, and Biden didn't do that. And yet there are some Republicans who are saying impeach Biden. No, if you don't like him, don't vote for him, but don't impeach him. Don't misuse the valuable mechanism of impeachment for purely partisan purposes. That is the greatest danger. I'm not saying this myself. I'm quoting Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers, who talked about the greatest danger of turning impeachment into a partisan weapon, which has happened. The greatest danger that Hamilton foresaw. Hamilton, who wrote about the impeachment provisions in the Federalist Paper and participated in the drafting, warned us that what the Democrats and the Republicans are now doing is precisely what he thought posed the greatest danger. And so we're seeing some Republicans now saying, hey, if we get elected and if we're in the White House, first thing we're going to do is we're going to go after the Biden people. That's banana republic stuff. That's what happens in some countries that qualify as genuine banana republics. As soon as one party wins the election, they put the other party's people in jail. They sometimes put them in jail while they're running. We did that once. We put in jail the man running for president under the Socialist Party in 1920, and he ran from jail and got 3 million votes. But he was obviously a marginal party candidate. We've never seen either party or people from either party try to put the leading candidate in jail or try to get him convicted of a felony, which is what the Democrats have done. I'm not saying all the Democrats. I'm not saying the White House. I am saying Alvin Bragg. I am saying Letitia James. I am saying some other people in the Justice Department who have been pushing for the criminal conviction of Donald Trump. And of course, the partisan aspect of this will become manifest if Hunter Biden is acquitted in Delaware. Now, part of me wants to see Hunter Biden acquitted. I don't want to see either side convicted. I wanted to see Trump acquitted, and I want to see Hunter Biden acquitted. But if Trump is convicted and Hunter Biden is acquitted, the evidence against Hunter Biden is so much greater than it was against Donald Trump. They were both convicted of making false entries, or in one case, Biden, either he did it or he was standing over the people who did it when he was buying his gun. In the Trump case, some bookkeeper did it, but the argument is that Trump must have known about it because he micromanages everything. But they're both false entry cases. And in one case, the evidence is overwhelming, almost undeniable. The only defense is, well, I was so addled with drugs that I didn't know what I was doing, and I thought maybe I wasn't addicted, that kind of a mental element defense. But the act element, the actus reus, as distinguished from the mens rea in the Delaware case, is clear beyond dispute, and it's non-existent in the Trump case. So if you get a conviction in New York in the Trump case and an acquittal in Delaware in the Hunter Biden case, then obviously everyone will see that there are two standards of justice, a double standard, and the justice system's weaponization has produced disaster for any claim of neutrality in the legal system. But my fond hope is that we will see reversal of the conviction in the Trump case and no conviction in the Biden case. We will see a disarmament on both sides. We will see both sides calling off the arms race and the weaponization race, though that I think is unlikely to happen. Will we see, if Trump is elected, efforts by some people in the Trump team to go after Biden and to go after all of his people who work for him? Of course we will. And let me tell you one more thing, as Justice Robert Jackson said, and I quoted it on my show. He said this, right after the Nuremberg trials. He was the chief prosecutor at Nuremberg on the Supreme Court of the United States at the same time. He said any thoughtful prosecutor, any clever prosecutor could go through, rummage through the statute books and find something against almost any citizen. And maybe that overstates it, but you can find something against almost any businessman or woman who runs a complicated business. You're going to be able to find some overstatement, some understatement, some failure to do something, some doing something that shouldn't have been done. It's impossible to lead a complicated, enormously complex business life without doing something that somebody might think might have in some way violated the statute. Now, in the Trump case, they couldn't even figure out what it was. And so they had to engage in magical thinking to turn an expired misdemeanor into a non-expired felony by going into Trump's mind and saying, well, maybe A, maybe B, maybe C, multiple choice. You don't have to tell us which, but somehow, somewhere, there must have been some evil intent, though we can't really demonstrate it. That's the problem with these kinds of prosecutions. And as I've said before, today the focus and the victim is Donald Trump, and tomorrow it will be Democrats, and the day after tomorrow it will be you and your relatives. If some district attorney doesn't like you, if some district attorney thinks you looked strangely at him, the way Judge Marchand thought that Robert Costello looked strangely at him, they'll prosecute and they'll get a conviction, because as the Chief Justice of the New York Court of Appeals once said, a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich if the prosecutor says to do it. I want to add to that, a petty jury will convict a ham sandwich if the ham sandwich's name is Trump and it's in Manhattan, where 85 to 90% of the people who are in the jury pool from which jurors are selected not only voted against Trump, but hate Trump with a passion and will do anything to stop him from being elected president a second time. And so what we're seeing here is tit for tat. And I want to go back to the shoe on the other foot test. That's always been my test right from the beginning. I wrote about it in several of my books. You always have to ask yourself the question, if the shoe were on the other foot. Keep all the facts the same, just change the parties and see if you come out the same way. That goes back to the Bible. As I've said before, the first rule for judges in the book of Deuteronomy is lo takir panim. Do not recognize faces. Do not do justice based on who is before you. Wear that blindfold over your eyes and don't recognize voices. Do what the Boston Symphony Orchestra does when it has tests for who will be the violinist or who will be the violist. They conduct these things behind screens. They don't know who it is, whether it's a person who's black or white or male or female, and it's supposed to be blind testing, and that sometimes results in orchestras that aren't racially diverse, but they may be musically diverse and diverse in other ways and economically diverse. But the goal of an orchestra is to audition and find people who are the best players. That's important for an orchestra, but it's 100 times more important for pilots and 1,000 times more important for doctors and for engineers and for others in whose hands our lives are. And we do not want, I don't think anybody wants to be under the surgical knife of somebody who is picked on any ground other than meritocratic. And the same thing with a pilot. I've told you the story before. I was in a plane with my whole family that was going through a horrible, horrible storm. And I think everybody on that plane had one prayer: please, please, let this not be a DEI pilot. Let this not be a pilot selected by diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracy based on their racial identity rather than on their ability to steer a plane through a terrible, terrible storm. And what's true for pilots and what's true for doctors should also be true for people in many, many other areas of life. But we're moving away from that. We're moving away from neutrality. We're moving away from objectivity. We're moving away from a criminal justice system that's blind. Today, nothing is blind. Everything is based on race, gender, sexual orientation. I wrote a note yesterday to AOC. AOC wrote a note to everybody saying, oh my God, do we know that this month or week, I don't remember what it was, is Gay Lesbian Pride Month? And I wrote to her and I said, well, please send that notice to your friends in Gaza, particularly your friends in Hamas. And my son Elon sent me a wonderful email, which you can probably get online, which has a gay man interviewing a gay woman. And the gay woman says, well, I'm pro-Palestine. And the gay man says, do you know what would happen to you if you were in Gaza or on the West Bank and people knew you were gay? No. Well, you'd be prosecuted. Oh, I didn't know that. And what about Israel, she says? Well, in Israel, there are gay pride parades. They even go through Jerusalem. And Tel Aviv has been described as the most gay-friendly city in the world. Oh, I didn't know that. Gays for Gaza, gays for Hamas. My God, how stupid can people be? No, how bigoted can people be? A gay for Hamas has to be so bigoted that they hate Jews even more than they love themselves. And the idea that you, a gay person, will support an organization whose core belief is that you should be dead, you should be killed because of your sexual orientation, your hatred of Jews has to be so great to warrant that conclusion. But it is, and that's why we see these demonstrations in favor of Hamas, and that's what they are. They're demonstrations in favor of Hamas. I want to repeat again, Israel has accepted the outlines of a ceasefire. The United States has, Egypt has, Qatar has, only Hamas hasn't. As President Biden said in an interview that was otherwise very critical of Israel, it's all Hamas's fault. The only reason we don't have a ceasefire is Hamas hasn't signed on. I'm waiting for one protester, one at Columbia, at Yale, one protester to now get on the street and protest Hamas's refusal to sign on to a ceasefire. I'm waiting for one protester who are holding signs, Israel, ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire. One protester to hold a sign that says Hamas, do a ceasefire. Until I see that, and I haven't seen it and I won't see it, don't lecture me about ceasefires. Ceasefires have nothing to do with this. These demonstrations are simple anti-Semitic, anti-Israel bigotry. That's all they are. And the people who participate in them are Hitler Youth. There's no getting around that. They are divided into two groups, the stupid and the nasty. There's no third group. And until these groups understand that they are on the wrong side of history, that if you want to support the Palestinians, you oppose Hamas. If you want to support gay rights, you support Israel. If you want to support individual rights, you don't support Hamas, whose charter doesn't believe in individual rights and doesn't believe in Israel's right to exist. And so let's see if we can get back to some degree of neutrality. That's the theme of this whole show: meritocracy, neutrality, objectivity, principle, all over partisanship. We're moving far away from that, and that is a disaster for America and for the world. All right, let's look at some letters. Okay. Hunter could take the stand and confess, and the jury will still bring back a not guilty verdict. That's interesting. Another one related to that. I got the letters in very, very small print, and in my age, I have to look hard. If Hunter is found not guilty, I will have lost all faith in the judicial system and watching the Trump trial. Now, you're right. There's no direct relationship between the Hunter Biden case and between the Trump case, except, as I said, they're both tried for the same kind of thing, nonviolent bookkeeper activities. Hunter Biden is obviously more serious. Having somebody with a gun who's drug-addled is a lot more serious than having somebody with a pen or a campaign contribution. But if there were to be an acquittal based on the evidence, I mean, it could be explained in a lot of ways. Hunter Biden has a very good lawyer, and that lawyer could make a difference. But remember that Hunter Biden is being tried in his home court, namely Delaware. The motto of Delaware is basically Biden always wins. It's Biden's home state. That's where he comes from. And I remember meeting him on the train once when he was a senator. She used to take the train from Washington to Wilmington, just an hour, I think. And I sat next to him and we schmoozed and we talked. And he told me he goes back to Delaware pretty much every night. And he is so clearly identified with Delaware And on the other hand, Trump is probably the most hated person in New York. And so, as I said on yesterday's show, geography is destiny, not only when it comes to geopolitics, but when it comes to criminal trials. That's why the Sixth Amendment has restrictions on where a trial can be conducted, because they want to make it fair. They want the trial to be conducted where all the participants live and have equal access to jury fairness. Of course, in the country we live in now, where everybody travels around and moves, it's awfully hard sometimes to locate where a fair place is to try a given defendant. But it's very clear that Donald Trump cannot fairly be tried in Manhattan, in Washington, D.C., or in Fulton County. Well, we'll see the results. Okay, let's see what's next. There is no way he gets convicted in his hometown. Okay. Being high doesn't mean it's a defense. If you're charged with that in drunken driving, you're not going to be able to get away with it by saying, I didn't know I was drunk, and therefore I can't be convicted of drunken driving. Well, of course, there's a difference. Drunken driving is an absolute liability offense. You don't have to know you're drunk. You don't have to intend to drive drunk. You just have to drive and be drunk. And it's objective. It's a certain number on a scale. But nonetheless, I think the point is well made. Oh, this is a nice one. Your numbers are phenomenal, and our numbers have been absolutely phenomenal. And thank you all. And please tell your friends to tune in to the Dershow. But the numbers are phenomenal. And then he says nice things about me. And so that's very, very nice. It's so interesting. Geography is destiny. Last night, I talked to 600 people in Charleston, South Carolina. I used to talk to 600 people in New York and on Martha's Vineyard. On Martha's Vineyard, I couldn't get 6 people to come and listen to my speech unless my children were in town, and I'd probably have a hard time, even with some of them, because they don't agree with me necessarily on my defense of Donald Trump. But 600 people, hard questions, good questions, but a lot of applause, standing ovation, 600 people in Charleston. And Charleston is a Democratic city in a Republican state, but it's a Democratic city. But the people here are extremely open-minded and fair. In New York, that wouldn't happen. I have had 600 people. When I debated recently on Iran, I had 600 people. And the crowd was respectful. Some were belligerent. But if I just wanted to speak on Israel, and that's what I spoke on yesterday. Probably be 100 audience members and maybe 200 demonstrators. But in Charleston, South Carolina, it was very, very different. And I just want to show my appreciation to the good people of Charleston who have been so nice to my wife and me. We've been here at the Spoleto Festival, which is this incredibly wonderful festival of music and an incredibly mediocre festival of plays. The music's great because, it's Beethoven. Tonight we're going to hear Beethoven's Third. We heard Mahler's Fifth. When it comes to the plays, they are so politically correct. They check off every box. The play basically has to be about America being a colonial country. The play has to be about how badly immigrants are being treated. And I agree with a lot of that, but buy a billboard. Buy a billboard. If you don't think that immigrants are being treated well, put an ad in the newspaper, but don't put on a play that has no artistic merit and is put on only because you're checking off all the boxes. It's like Jon Stewart. Nobody laughs at his jokes. They clap at his jokes. And when a comedian gets his jokes clapped at, he's not really a comedian. He's just a political figure who is capitalizing on the fact that his self-selected audience approves of his politics. So 3 cheers for the music at Spoleto and 1 cheer for the efforts of people to put on political plays that are not artistic, but check off all the identity politics and politically correct boxes. Still loving it. Food in Charleston is beyond belief, beyond belief. Oh, you wouldn't believe some of the things I ate today and going to eat tonight and going to eat tomorrow. So thank you, Charleston. I'll be back in New York for the next show. But in the meantime, everybody have a good week.